Today's guest is a former CIA agent named Mike Baker. He has a show on the Discovery Channel. You may have seen him on the Joe Rogan Experience, which is where I first caught glimpse. And today we're going to be talking about some important conversations, Afghanistan, how that really ties into China as well, and what this means for the United States and really the future of the global landscape. So make sure you hit the like button on this video, send it out in the YouTube universe if you think it's an important conversation, support the independent channel, copy and paste that link, put it out on Twitter, whatever, put it in HDMI cable, grab a glass of wine or a coffee with your friend, give us a comment down below. We'll link Mike's stuff right there down below. And it's nice to see you, Mike.
Thank you very much, man. I appreciate it. And yeah, hope all's well.
So
you're in the mountain time zone, right? Are you in the mountain time zone?
Yeah, I'm in Southern Utah. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's a good place. As we were talking before the show, it's if you have to ride out a pandemic, this part of the country is a good place to do it.
Yeah, you got to be on the mountain time zone. That's the place to be. So, you know what's kind of interesting when we were talking, you were telling me about you got a TV show filming the second season. It's on the Discovery. You worked CIA and a lot of stuff globally. And one thing that I noticed, it seems like Joe has a lot of these types of folks on, but there's a lot of people that used to work in military or intelligence that Jocko's another one. There's a lot of people that have ended up just becoming really successful in the private world, not being part of Halliburton's team. And, you're one of them. You got a show. So tell us a little bit about that show before we rock and roll.
Yeah, sure. No, it's on, thank you for asking. It's on Discovery Channel, Discovery Network, Science Channel shows it as well. It's called Black Files Declassified. So the concept is, oddly enough, we wanted to make a show where, perhaps the viewers could learn something. So we're going against the mainstream.
The only show that's out there.
I know, that's it. That's it. And so the premise is typically in investigations, right? And I've got a company that once I got out of the agency, I started a business that does a lot of global investigations and risk management, security work, intel operations. And one of the things that's typical there is you've got to follow the money, right? I mean, at some point, the money's going to show out. If there's been some questionable activity, whatever it is, that will be one of those threads you're going to have to pull on. So we started, the premise of the show was, well, what if we take that to the government, right? To the military and intel communities. We say, okay, if we pull a thread here, then what do we find in that budget? Because the one thing about government, no matter how secretive a project is or an operation or an element of the military, whatever, it's got to be funded. And so that money's got to sit somewhere. And people always think, well, it's just in some, but no, actually gets put in a pot of something somewhere. So that was the premise. And it's kind of expanded, and we look at a lot of different things within the government, trying to figure out how a project started, how an operation started, what it looked like at the time, what it looks like now, what it's morphing into in the future. That's my big golden retriever back there in the background, Hendrix barking, and somebody's breaching the perimeter. And so that was the premise of the show. I don't want to bang on about that, but it's very entertaining. We're traveling all over the country and the world, talking to great people, and it gives me a chance to do all sorts of interesting things. So it's been good fun so far. Hendrix.
He's having fun.
He's having a good time out there.
Okay, so what about black budgets then? We're really going to be talking, ultimately, our main theme, China, Afghanistan, follow the money kind of fits in. But while you're discussing that, one thing, so I'm somebody that looking into various declassified documents, I find myself feeling like I don't have a lot of trust for government at large is one way I'm saying in the most YouTube appropriate forms, and black budgets is a component of that. Is how would you go through, some of the depths of whether it's a certain secret intelligence agency or people doing projects that maybe are more questionable. So how does a black budget fit into looking into some of those things?
Yeah, well, that's really kind of the heart of the whole thing is sort of the Black Files Declassified name comes from essentially what is a black
wow.
file. So it's a black budget. It's funded by money that creates this black file. So the black file could be anything. I mean, if you think back, going years and years back, MK Ultra, sort of that infamous series of experiments that really went south quickly. That was a black file, again, funded by money that was stuck into a budget elsewhere. And there's a lot of these out there, and so we don't. I wouldn't want to fool the viewers into thinking somehow we're releasing sources and methods and classified information. We're not doing that because you know what? I don't want to end up in Gitmo. But I've got a very good relationship with my old outfit. I'm always very open about that. I come at a lot of things from a point of view of someone who worked in the intel business and operations and had a great time. Right? I'm not one of those people that got out and has some axe to grind. I loved what I did, and I have a great deal of respect for all the folks that are still doing it. But the show gets as close as you can to exploring these projects and really shedding some light. We don't like to leave an episode, loose. We like to tie it up with something that is helpful to the viewers, right? So it's not one of those shows that at the end of it you think, well, they didn't tell me anything. They didn't make a decision one way or the other. We try to get to a decision at the end of this thing. But the black budgets is a very interesting area that a lot of people don't understand. They don't know that that's how parts of the government work, right? You've got to fund these things. Money has to be allocated somehow. And so it's a very interesting process. The U2 operation, that U2 and all the Blackbird and everything that came after it, surveillance, air assets and platforms, that was all under black budgets and black files. So it's a fascinating world, and we just try to make it interesting and informative and entertaining for the viewers. Listen to me. I'm like some sort of, what a marketing spiel. This is good. Good night, everybody. We don't have time to talk about Afghanistan.
Well, it leads into, it's pretty important, especially there's a lot of alarming things that are declassified now. Project Mockingbird, and so what happens if you have aspects of government or intelligence agencies that have no longer are really looking out in the best interest of the Constitution? And, that's an interesting conversation that, it's cool. You're starting to explore it in the most TV appropriate ways possible.
Yeah. You want transparency. There are certain things, I mean, don't get me wrong. There are certain things based on, again, everybody has to base their beliefs on their life experiences. My life experiences tell me that you do need to keep some secrets. That's just the way the world is, right? If everything was transparent, good God, it'd be even more of a mess than it is right now. So you do need some secrets, but you don't want to throw that net out there so broad that you're basically classifying everything, and suddenly everything is top secret or beyond in terms of classification. You want to be very selective about how you do that so that it means something.
So yeah, I'm with you on all that. So, but let's talk about Afghanistan. As I was thinking through kind of a theme talking with you, I was telling you and I were going to talk about China. And to me, I said to you, I feel like the real bigger storyline behind Afghanistan is actually China. And, we had their statement the other day about Taiwan, like they're making a move. And then the minerals and the supposed agreement with the Taliban in China, like they're making and they have been for a while. And now it's getting to the point where like, this is becoming an obvious situation coming to a boil. What do you think about that? Yeah,
I think it's a very important part that's getting lost just because of the immediate, shock of how, bad it's been over the past few days. But it will be a very important aspect of this story going forward. Look, China. What is China most worried about with the situation in Afghanistan right now? They're most worried about extremism spilling across their border and impacting their Muslim communities. Right? That's what they fear most out of all of this. What do they want? Well, they don't want that. And they also want the rare earth minerals that are sitting under the dirt there in Afghanistan. And so those are the two primary drivers for China's interest. Every nation acts in its own best interest. That's what drives China right now. So anything they do regarding the Taliban has to be seen as an effort to kind of feed the beast and keep the beast in a box, right? So that it doesn't spill over their border. Russia is the same way. I mean, frankly, so there's very few reasons why anybody really is interested in Afghanistan. But that's for the neighbors, that's one of them. And the minerals is a big issue for China. So yeah, I think the geopolitical situation in Afghanistan is going to become much more of an issue after the initial situation on the ground. I don't want to say stabilizes, because it's going to be a goat rope, but once it gets past this first shockwave.
So we'll dive into China a little bit more in a minute, but basically open-ended saying, what do you think about what's happening in Afghanistan is like a pretty big question, because it's like you could just answer that for 1 hour. I mean, but what do you, my opinion is, I mean, of course, I was really young when that all originally happened, but there's a lot of question marks with it, and I certainly felt like we shouldn't have been there. Everything from the opium to the rare earth elements to, there's a lot of question marks with bin Laden and where was he and ties to the intelligence. There's a lot of things to unpack there, but just at the end of the day, I felt like, yeah, I was on board with that. But the way that they left, and then seeing these videos of like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of military grade weapons, drones, helicopter, like it almost felt like there was, me being someone who's very cynical, I'm almost like, did they do this on purpose? Like, what are they doing? So what did you make of this, of the way that this was handled?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a clown show, to be sure. But I think people, first of all, people have to make sure that they understand the difference between making a decision to leave the country after all this time and executing on that decision. All the criticism, all the rightful criticism that is being thrown at the Biden administration is about the execution of the decision. There was a fairly broad consensus that after all these years, it was time to go, right? And they hadn't any interest in buying what we were selling. If after 20 years of training and equipping, resourcing, mentoring, the military wasn't ready to stand on their own, they're not going to be ready in another 20 years. It's not the nature of that place. And so I think that is first and foremost, is people have to understand, because there's a lot of people get their backs up because they're loath to criticize the Biden administration. And not to get overly political, but look, Biden was elected because everybody was sick of Trump. They wanted a nice guy, right? Nobody voted for Biden because they thought he was the smartest kid in the class, right? He'd lost 2 previous presidential elections, and there were questions about his past decision making. He had 8 years as VP to own the Afghan situation. There was the criminal reform issues. So what they really were voting for was somebody who was nice, and he is nice, and not Trump, right? And so Trump really screwed us over because he set the bar so low that people were willing to just say, okay, fine, we're going to go with this. And everybody was fairly complicit. But so I'm not surprised by the current administration's approach to this. But good God, it's a logistical operation. When you decide you're going to withdraw from an environment, whether it's in a skirmish or whether it's after 20 years, you plan for the worst case scenario. That's your choice, right? That is what you first do. So you say, okay, I'm going to plan for the worst case scenario, and everything else, if it's better than that, once we enact the operation or the logistical withdrawal, then, great, that's good for us. And so what would be the worst case scenario? You would sit back and you would go, the country collapses in a matter of days or a couple of weeks. So how do you not plan for that? Even in addition to having assessments that said, look, we can't we're not going to put a specific day on it. So like General Milley said when he went into a press conference, and he said, well, we didn't get any intel assessments that said the government was going to collapse in 11 days. That's very Washington to be very specific like that and say 11 days. Well, of course you didn't, General Milley. No one gave you an intel assessment that said 11 days, but you had a lot of assessments that were actually published back in April, made headlines that said this very thing could happen. So the problem I've got is not leaving. We should have left after the surgical strikes and, after 9/11. And, I've been saying that ever since. Our job shouldn't have been to nation build and try to improve the literacy rate or build another road. I don't want to sound harsh, but I don't care. We have to always look at things as if it's in our national interest or not. And that's how every other nation does it. And so it's the execution of the decision to leave that it's a logistical operation that UPS or other major corporations around the world do every day, moving people and material. And you do it safely and efficiently and effectively. And it didn't happen. So is the criticism deserved? Yes, absolutely. Is it, is it going to have an impact on us 2 weeks from now? Are we still going to be talking about it? Probably not, because the news cycle moves so quickly and everybody's got, attention deficit disorder. So we may not even be thinking about this in 2 weeks.
Which is even scarier, because what it really makes me go is, how do you, as an American citizen, how do I have any trust, confidence, or faith in any aspect of the government? You've got this military budget. You're supposed to be geniuses. The Pentagon's got this big budget. The White House got this big budget. And you mean to tell me not one of you guys thought it? I mean, it's almost like someone was drunk in the middle of the night and was like, hey, quickly get people out.
Yeah.
Don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they were.
Yeah, you close Bagram Air Base, which is the most secure site to conduct a withdrawal operation. You send all the soldiers out, the military out, before you deal with the civilians, the diplomats, and all our Afghan allies and friends who for 20 years, look, that's another thing that pisses me off, is that the current administration right now is trying to blame the Afghan military. You look at how many Afghan soldiers died over the past, 2 decades, and it completely dwarfs, and not that, a single life is we shouldn't lose, but it's staggering how many lives they lost in this battle. So I don't want to hear anything about the Afghan military. They made a decision because they were acting in their self-interest, which said, you guys are off the X, you're gone, right? You abandoned Bagram in the middle of the night, right? And now you've all, it's a dust off, we're done. And so there was no belief that anything was going to survive or last. So these guys, individual soldiers, are thinking, I don't want my family slaughtered, right? So I'm putting my weapon down. I can understand that thought process, right? And we should have thought about that a little bit more, right? When we were doing, our assessments in the White House about what could happen. But look, several administrations own the Afghan situation, right? That's clear. I will remind people that the current administration, he was the VP from 2009 to 2017. So he owns part of that as well. He's not new to this. But the current administration owns the execution of this operation to leave. And they had months and months and months to do the simple HR work. Not simple, it's a heavy lift. I don't want to simplify it.
But it should be simple, man. If you're the biggest military and you got all these fucking guys, all these geniuses, and look, were they too busy freaking doing social justice stuff? I mean, you see these generals with their double masks and their visors and their gloves, and I'm like, you clearly, what were you doing? Like, why didn't you think this through? I mean, like, it's, you would think that we made a mistake, many administrations involved, but like the level, I can't tell if it's criminality or if every single one of them is so incredibly dumb that that maybe dozens of people or hundreds of people need to resign. And though the news cycle will change, those same people are in the driver's seat. It's If you found out someone couldn't drive a car, you wouldn't be like, just keep finishing the drive. We'll fix this when we get home.
Right.
And
right.
like,
we only got about 20 more miles on the highway. We'll be fine. You keep going.
And I'm like, what's going on? I mean, like, I can't.
Well, no, you're right. Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, Jake Sullivan, National Security, General Milley. Yeah, it is staggering. And it's in the concept of you had this time to think about this, right? You had time you understood what it meant to be in fighting season or to be in winter, right? And what that meant for the Taliban's ability to move and to fight. You understood how many Afghans had helped us over the years. You had files on them. You could have processed the visas and their departure for them and their families months and months ago. You moved out all the non-essential workers. You could have moved out diplomats. You could have moved out NGO workers, women's rights advocates who now are stuck. You could have moved out all the people that you knew once the screen door hit the ass of the last soldier out that it was going to happen, but they didn't. And probably the saddest part of all this is what you're kind of implying here, which is it's Washington, D.C. So there will be no accountability. They're going to have their hearings, right? Their hearings are designed to find someone else to blame. That's the point of the hearings. So if anybody hears that they're having a hearing up on Capitol Hill, the reason for that is because they're looking for someone else to blame besides the decision makers in the White House and his closest advisors. Again, like a Blinken and these people that are supposedly so smart, and they believe they're the smartest people, and that's part of the problem. They believe they're the smartest people in the room.
Yeah, it's concerning. I mean, by now you kind of get my vibe with some of my remarks, but I feel like what I'm saying is really, rational. How on earth are they commanding this level of budgets? We're the greatest debtor nation in the history of the world. We're seeing inflation rising. It almost doesn't even feel like this is a democracy. I mean, I almost feel like we're in a quasi, like what John F. Kennedy said, this essentially, what did he call it? A monolithic conspiracy. Eisenhower talked about this same thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how does this get corrected? And then this leads into China and the level of foreign Chinese money that the FBI confirmed after the election, Hunter Biden's laptop was real. He's on a recording saying, while he's on crack, he's saying, I don't know what to do. He was my business partner. He's a high-level Chinese fucking communist spy. And then they found him dead in a river. He says that on a recording. And it's not just Democrats. It's all the top-level deep state Republic. They're all on the same thing. But I'm like, how do you? I'm 30, right? And I told you I've got a 1-year-old daughter. I'm losing any level of trust or safety that I feel at all. I mean, what are they doing? China's, they've already made their move on Canada. What's going on?
They view this, and again, this is an important part that I think people will maybe focus on later, but it's what this debacle in Afghanistan, what it means to some of these other nations that don't have our best interests at heart, China primarily, but Russia, Iran. They look at this, and then also our allies. Think about how Taiwan views this, right? In the current scheme of things, the Chinese regime under Xi had already been accelerating their talk about the unification of China. Basically, obviously, they believe that Taiwan is theirs, and so they had already started to accelerate that. They've been increasingly aggressive in their military buildup and in their actions overseas. And so you have to look at this through their eyes, right? And through Putin's eyes. You think Putin is going to care the next time that President Biden tells him that he shouldn't involve himself in cyber shenanigans? And by the way, here's 12 more companies we'd like you not to target if you don't mind. I know that a lot of people are tired. Of course, we're tired of the war on terror. But another issue here is this. I don't know. You know what? I don't want to disappear down a rabbit hole. But let's suffice it to say that.
No, tell me.
You and I, and your 1-year-old daughter, and one of my boys, we could have put together a better, more efficient, effective, safer logistical operation to withdraw everyone from Afghanistan. We just could have. It's not rocket science, and they shouldn't act like it was in. I mean, President Biden now is talking like, well, we baked this into the decision. We knew it was going to be like this. We knew it was going to be chaos. No, you didn't, because a month ago you said, yeah, it's highly unlikely that we're going to see this, sort of happen. This chaos happen, and now he wants us all to believe. It's that level of arrogance that, and you see it on both sides. It's Democrats, it's Republicans. I tend to be a very small government person. I don't have a lot of trust or confidence in any politician, frankly. I think there's something about the psychology of somebody who wants to be a politician, because who willingly sends themselves to Washington and then spends the rest of their career begging people for money so they can get reelected. That's kind of psychotic.
Yeah, it's not a good situation that we've created, and I don't know. Let me ask you this: if the intelligence community already knew that the Biden family was in business relationship with with spies for the Communist Party that ran these venture fronts, I mean, why is that not a national security threat? And just to also be fair, for someone that thinks this is a Democrat Republican thing, the problem with what's happened with China as we move over to China is that all the General Spalding, I've had him on my show. He wrote a book called The Stealth War. He worked in some different intelligence committee that was focused on China. He put together his initial blueprint, which was on how China was a real threat. And he basically got kicked out of the committee. And he points the finger at some high level Republicans. I forget if it's McConnell or I forget if it was Lindsey Graham, but they bought out a lot of Chinese, both sides of the fence. Basically, any of these people that are lifelong politicians, the majority of them have Chinese money. And the influence is so bad, I don't understand why. If the intelligence community's job is to be intelligent and protect us from these threats, why haven't they stepped in, whether it's within the Biden administration or just whether it's McConnell or nameless Republican? How is that not a national security threat?
Well, you have to. The intel community's job is to provide their best assessment of whatever the tasking is to whatever administration is in charge at the time. They're not responsible for how that administration then acts on it. And so you get raw intelligence, you collect information overseas, maybe from an asset, maybe from signals intelligence, however you get it. And then you put that into the chain, right? And it goes in, and then it gets combined with intelligence coming from other sources, maybe military intelligence, maybe NSA. And then it gets into the National Security Council, it gets over to the White House. And that's really where the editing process happens, right? That's where you've moved every step of the way. Is that initial raw intelligence makes its way through that process. All along the way, it gets a little bit, I don't want to say corrupted, but it gets massaged and it kind of gets worked. And by the time it lands on a decision maker's desk, it may not look anything like the raw intelligence that came out of some asset's mouth in the middle of somewhere in a fourth world country. And so, but you don't want an intel community that takes matters into its own hands in terms of acting on things. Their job is to respond to tasking from whichever administration's in charge and provide their best analysis and assessment, right? And then it's up to the decision makers to act on it, right? And you try the best you can to keep the intel community apolitical. And I've seen a lot of crap overseas over my years, and we do a very good job when you compare it to how other nations operate. Is it perfect? No, but it's a human endeavor. So we do the best you can. I think it's a constant battle to ensure that you're not politicizing any government organization, but you definitely don't want a politicized intel community. And that's kind of what, occasionally you'll get a president that tries to influence that process. And that's why you don't have wholesale changes in the leadership of an organization like the agency, the CIA, every time there's a change in administration. And that happens overseas. Some new president comes in and they'll wipe out the intel, apparatus and bring in their own people, right? And that's a recipe for some real problems. I mean, not that we don't have our occasional issues, but you try the best you can to keep that community from being political.
Yes. So, I mean, then to me, then it's like, okay, so is it inherently flawed if the intelligence community can say, here's 150 high-level politicians and corporate leaders that are in high-level business with factions of the Chinese Communist Party or bought out in a way that could be damning to national security, but the gatekeepers, due to the way the political apparatus is structured, never allow that to come out. That I guess that answers the question to that's why it's gotten as bad as it has, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. In effect, I mean, look, and something like that, if you're talking about, look, a corporation has undue influence with the Chinese regime. The Chinese regime has, corrupted that business, by offering up licenses or however it may work. That is an issue for the FBI, and they're supposed to act on that. They're supposed to act on any U.S. business that appears to be getting sideways in that regard. So, again, it's with China, it's what they do, right? It's how they've always operated. Everybody for decades now has been jonesing for the Chinese market. It's been the holy grail. And very few companies have actually succeeded in China. Those that have had a handful of things in common. They've been very patient. And they've been willing to dump a lot of resource in there. They've been willing to look the other way while all their intellectual property is stolen. They've understood that there is no rule of law. So they've done everything they can to avoid conflict because they know they're not going to win that one inside China.
Right.
And so it's, I don't mind. I mean, I think of course you're going to do business with China. It's the nature of the world right now. It's a shrinking globe. They're a massive economy. It's not pragmatic to say, no, that company shouldn't be doing business, right? It doesn't make any sense. I would like them to be more pragmatic about it. I would like them to be a little bit more forthcoming in understanding what they're dealing with, the nature of Xi and his regime, and how there is no rule of law. And it would be nice to say occasionally to see a large company say, you know what, we're going to actually, rather than just sort of say that we're concerned about human rights or say that we're woke, we're actually going to act on it, right? We're going to, we think you need to do something about this situation, whether it's the Uyghurs or completely throttling the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. But again, I tend to be fairly cynical and fairly pragmatic, and I don't think that's going to happen. So
do you think we're just on a collision course until basically the Communist Party's movement essentially takes over everything?
Well, no, I think the flaw in in Xi's plan is what they've always been worried about, which is internal dissent. We've got a massive population. They can only allow that ceiling to get so high. And they've had for decades now, they've had this mirage of everyone's moving up into the middle class. Everybody has a chance to move up, and not really. And so there are a lot more protests inside China than get reported on. There's a lot more dissent within China than gets reported on, obviously, because they control all the levers of media. And the one thing that they're worried about, just like with extremism spilling across the border and impacting the Muslim communities within China, is their population finally saying, no, you know what, actually that's enough. And I think that is a long time coming. I don't think we're going to see it in our lifetimes, but it keeps them to some degree in check. Now, do they think that we're weak? Yeah. Do they think that at some point they are divinely going to ascend to the top of the food, chain? Yeah, they do. And so everything they do is in with that in mind. And they more than any other nation act in their own best interest, in their own self-interest. And they don't apologize for it like we do sometimes.
So do you think that they are planning to take Taiwan while the Biden administration is in here? They saw what happened in Afghanistan and they know that we're not going to do anything about it. Do you anticipate, if we look down a couple cards, do you think that's next on the rollout?
Yeah. I hate to say it, but I think it's certainly in their playbook. Whether they accelerate it to the point within the Biden administration, maybe they buy that time and see whether Kamala Harris, takes over in 2024. At which point, then, yeah, I think it is definitely in the cards. I think it's they're not. China is very calculating, and they're also willing to play the long game. So maybe I'm incorrect here, because they'll look at something and they'll see 30 years down the road, and we see like 5 minutes ahead, right? Because there may be something good on TikTok. So they have a much longer view than we do. So maybe they look at it and go, I don't know, but I think they're also opportunistic. And right now they're looking at this current administration and thinking it's probably a really good opportunity here that they could take advantage of. And honest to God, what are we going to do? Are we going to risk a global conflict because of Taiwan? That's what the Taiwan people are thinking right now after they're watching what's happening. And look, everybody, I think, knew we were going to get out of Afghanistan at some point. They just didn't realize it was going to be such a mess. And then we were going to look so weak in doing it. But I have a feeling that, right now, the Taiwanese government is not particularly comfortable.
If all of these things are true, Hunter Biden's laptop and the level of buyout from the Chinese Communist Party, other members of top level Republicans that are bought out by China, et cetera, my inclination is, especially since China's such a long, they got their 100-year plan. I mean, these are some strategic guys, and they've been fattening the Biden family to get this position and then make their move. And they knew before the election was even won that this was the plan if he won, that they were going to make a push towards Taiwan and they were going to move forward and connect a few more dots. To me, that seems pretty, in my opinion, it seems pretty obvious. Then it makes me go, they stand to gain so much with a Biden administration in office that I can't help but wonder, was this a biowar weapon released on purpose in order to cause essentially total chaos during election season and go from there?
Yeah, I don't know if I can quite get to that point, but do I think that the Chinese are complicit, or the regime is complicit in the fact that lacks procedures, and then a very large cover-up allowed this thing to be so much worse than it should have been in terms of the pandemic? Absolutely. Again, acting in their own best interests, they completely covered up what's happened as far as I'm concerned. And they are completely responsible for the massive pandemic that ensued. Do they feel bad about it? I don't think so. But
their winner, the communist motto is win at all costs. That's what it is. It's win at all costs, and they're tougher and they're willing to play at a level that, due to our inherent greed that has compromised our system, they've made it a part of their strategy as a way to beat us without having to press any nuclear buttons yet.
Yeah. They don't see a pushback. They don't see a downside. Look, the international community was completely willing and compliant, to go along and allow this obfuscation, this lack of transparency that the Chinese regime had in the aftermath of the initial pandemic, when there was some talk. There were assessments and talk about the lab and an outbreak from the lab in very early days. I'm going back to January and February of 2020. There was no surprise. But the WHO and the UN and others, they are in their own way, right, responsible and compliant with the Chinese regime. And so I think, look, we've given up over the years in real dollar terms, the amount of money we've lost to the Chinese regime because of their theft of intellectual property, their economic espionage, is staggering. But we allowed that to happen for decades. Right? We sometimes act currently, during the Trump administration when he was really banging on about it. I was happy to see that. Right? I disagreed with Trump as an individual. I liked a lot of the policies. I can dislike a president and like the policies. I can like a president and dislike the policies. I think that's rational thinking, right? So, but people seem unable to do that. You can't separate those two things anymore. But with Trump, when he was banging on the Chinese, I was all for it because finally we were talking about it. But make no mistake, that economic espionage has been going on for decades and decades. And it is a very efficient and aggressive model that they have. And so that's allowed them. They made that decision. The Japanese, after World War II, made the decision they were going to be a manufacturing powerhouse. That's how they were going to come back from the ashes. Chinese regime decided they're going to steal everything from research and development and bypass that heavy lift, all that cost and time involved in research and development. And that's how they're going to leapfrog up to the top of the food chain. So, we just have to be pragmatic about it. And sometimes, I worry that we get these politicians in there that somehow imagine that they're going to do it better than the previous one. I'm going to create peace with the Palestinians, or I'm going to create a democracy in Afghanistan. And that's kind of a human nature thing, right? We always want to think we can do better than the previous generation, or we can do better than the previous leadership, whatever. So I get that part is sort of human nature, but we should have learned. I'm old enough. You talk about you're young, and you're young in terms of Afghanistan and the history there. I'm old enough to have been involved in getting the Soviets out the first time. And if you had told us at the agency that not too long after that we'd be in there entrenched for longer than the Soviets were, I think you're absolutely crazy. There's no way to make that happen. You can't hold this place. Shortly after, we got our hands on all the Politburo papers from the Soviets, and the problems they had were the same problems we had, and they spent the last 6-7 years of their occupation of Afghanistan trying to get the hell out. And so what did they do? Well, they tried they left the countryside, and they took they created strongholds in the urban centers because they couldn't hold the countryside. And they spent all that time trying to figure out, how do we find some form of government that's going to stay here after we leave and be an ally? How do we deal with the corruption? All the same problems we had. It's insane. So I know a lot. Veterans now are talking about how sad and frustrated and angry they are, over the past 20 years, those that had served in Afghanistan. But you go back before that. And good God, we didn't need much of a reminder. We had a very recent case study to understand how screwed up it was. But it's that human nature to say we can do it better now. And that doesn't work out.
Yeah, I hope that they're saying I can do it better. I'm more cynical. I don't think they're actually saying that, but you could be right. Maybe they're just really dumb and they're not. I think it's worse than that. But I feel like the more I've started to study and do my own reading into history, feels like so much of history is this cycle of a move towards first a socialism and then a communist takeover. And it seems like this pendulum of society. And I feel like we're moving that way, but to me, it's different in a few ways in that there's a lot of help from technology to institute that. So in some ways, technology becomes the bridge to institute it. Yeah. And one of my biggest concerns is the Chinese social credit score system. And, we also saw before the social credit, not before, after the social credit score system, they instituted and tested their central bank digital currency that had programmable money. I mean, everyone covered it, Business Insider, whatever. And it was programmable money, right? And they could make the money disappear. You know, you could obviously connect the dots to a global universal basic income that's programmable, and it's designed to incentivize and decentivize human behavior in certain ways. And if you tie that into the social credit score system, and the amount of global security state that's created, when I connect dots, you know, not 6 months from now, but when my daughter's 20, or maybe when she's 10, maybe when she's 30, some type of a global social credit score system. I mean, there's even been like New York Times articles saying that we need to do away with normal credit because it's racist and like,
yeah. Well, everything's racist now.
So what do you think about that?
Yeah.
In the social credit
I'm not,
score?
you know what, here's what I think. I think my parents, who, you know, were born, what the hell, my dad was born, I'm the youngest of a bunch of brothers, but my dad was born in 1920, right? And they wanted a better life, right, for us. Now, their parents, my father's dad, got out of Russia, right, during the revolution. He was an officer on the wrong side of things, and so he barely made it to the States, and he wanted a better life for his kids. His dad wanted better. We all wanted a better life for our children. That's also human nature. We want to make it easier for them. Well, I think what's happened is we've made it so damn easy that we're now on the point of diminishing returns, frankly, as a society. And I don't want to sound like Wilford Brimley or, you know, some old codger here, but, you know, we've seemed to have lost sort of that concept of personal responsibility, of self-sufficiency, of, you know, you're not owed something just because you're here. It doesn't give you a right, right? It's like, you know, it's like that old, you know, saw about, you know, people always bring up, you know, everybody gets a trophy. Well, there's some truth in that, right? That creates a mindset. We've been doing it not just for this generation, the previous one, the one before that. I'm guilty of it too. I want it easy on my kids, but I backed off that now. And I spend more time kicking them in the ass and telling them, you know, you don't get a trophy just for showing up. It's not special. And you're not special unless you make yourself special, right? You got to work harder. I don't care whether you don't have to be the fastest kid out there, the strongest or the smartest, but you got to work harder, because that's about one of the few things you can actually control as a person. And we lost that. And I don't know if we walk that dog back. But I agree with you. I worry about what we're leaving for our kids. I worry about what's going to happen down the road. I've spent a lot of time, most of my childhood and adult life overseas. And I've seen a lot of crap in some difficult places. And we're very fortunate to be here in this country. I tend to, you know, I get my rose-colored glasses on. I see a lot of the problems, but I've also seen all the crap that's out there. And we're fortunate to be here, and we've lost that. I can still go overseas. I can still end up someplace devoid of anything where they have nothing. And I can talk to somebody there, and they still believe if I just make my way to America and I work hard, I can do something. And then I have a hard time finding sometimes people here, not just young people. I'm not just banging on about young people. I'm talking about anybody, right? And I don't know how we lost that, but I do think it has something to do with the fact that successive generations have made our life very soft and very easy. And I'm now going to climb down off my soapbox.
Yeah, you know, listening to me talk, you know, you could tell I connect some dots that maybe to some people aren't there, or you don't agree with, or I'm a little more cynical. But I'm also one of my favorite documents, you know, is the Constitution. I believe in the real original idea of everything that at least that we're told that America is supposed to be about. And I think if you tie the whole theme, I'm afraid we're losing a lot of those freedoms. And I'm afraid that it climaxes with some type of down the road this type of social credit score type of thing that basically builds this global thing. Is that a conspiracy theory? Do you think I'm far-fetched? Do you think that's something that we need to be careful of in the future, that type of Chinese influence can have a global influence? I mean, I'm concerned that a health pass could tie into that in the future. We know there's certain things, whether it's the Patriot Act or whatever, then 7 years down the road, we're like, how did that dot leave there? And the government's there and they're like, ha guys. And I'm concerned that there may be a couple dots there that leads to a social credit score type of thing. Or do you think that there's a point at which it's in our blood as the culture of America there will be a point at which people stand up for freedom? I'm afraid that hasn't happened because we built this society, as you stated, and now people have become dependent on big government and encouraged by it. And I'm afraid that it's going to climax at a dissenter type of system that uses a form of an internet ID. Klaus Schwab, he's the head of the World Economic Forum, Great Reset. He's on video saying we need an internet ID to monitor misinformation. I mean, he's the last guy I want monitoring what I think is good information. Do you think that is a reasonable thing to be worried about, this type of a global social credit score system, or do you think that that's not?
Well, no, I think it's reasonable to be concerned about what technology and government, kind of a parentheses, could do. And in the past, I probably would have said, 20 years ago, I probably would have said, nah, you know what, the spirit, sort of the American spirit of individualism and, and freedoms and liberties, it's too strong but that seems to be receding, right? And people seem to be, I don't ever understand it, but they seem to be more in love with big government and regulation than I don't know where all these people have been or what their life experience is, but that is very bizarre to me. So I think it's a reasonable concern to have. Do I think it's likely? I don't think so. Maybe I'm still being a little too optimistic. I do think China, the regime, maybe even under Xi, but I think he's going to start showing some cracks in the armor, and I think he's going to have some issues, and they'll probably become a little more inward looking and start trying to shore up their own internal issues. But I think, look, facial recognition,
well, dude, that was it. There's the facial recognition stuff in the infrastructure bill they say is for drunk driving. I mean, look, like the writing's on the wall. I mean, it seems pretty obvious.
Yeah, and I think but the only way I think, and that you prevent that is a curious, inquisitive, demanding public, right? Population. And so if I guess my problem is I don't know that I've got enough optimism that that's what we have in America still. People who just seem willing to go along, get along, just, because again, they're comfortable and look, now I got something else on Facebook I got to look at. But you've got to, the only way to keep politicians and the size of government in check is to be constantly demanding transparency as much as possible. And that means the thing that a lot of people don't want to hear, which is individual responsibility and action. And really where that starts is local, right? You can have more impact by deciding in a logical and an intelligent manner who should be on your school board or who should be in your city or town council. Yeah. And those seem little things, and then people get frustrated because they think, well, that's not going to have any impact. Well, yes, it will. Your local and state elections mean far more than putting some, numpty into the White House, right? That's where your impact is. But I worry that we kind of give up on that, and then you get sort of this bizarre partisan thing that we've got going on now, where it's the far sides that make those decisions because only they really truly committed vote in the primaries, right? And so that skews the works as well. And then everybody stands around and goes, how come we don't have more moderates or people that live in the center where, things can actually get done? And that's because the system, has gravitated towards what it is. But anyway, I think that was kind of I don't know where I was going with that, other than to say, people got to pay attention to what's happening in their neighborhood, in their city, in their town, in their state, and act on it. Make a difference.
Yeah, I agree with you too. And I hear what you're saying. You're saying hopefully we don't get to that point, but you tie it back to the individual and the things that, we're collectively responsible as individuals and in the local level. Before we recorded, I asked you what it was like in your town, and I think I live in the best kept secret in America. And recently the government here in the county issued a statement. There'll be no new MASK mandates or any level of restrictions of any kind that will be instituted. And we haven't had any to begin with. And business and the economy is a lot better than places. And I almost feel like when I just drive 90 minutes across the border to Nevada, or a couple hours to California or even to Arizona, I literally feel like I'm in another country when I go somewhere else. It's so weird. And so then I go, all right, we can talk and I can ask you a million things that seem like they could possibly happen and they could be bad, whether it's vaccine passports, whether it's government being bought out or incompetent, whatever it is. We could go down there to a million CIA declassified documents. But then I go, all right, now that I got a 1-year-old, I'm thinking through. I'm like, what is the solution? I feel like I'm doing everything I can do. I've got my businesses. I save my money. I take care of myself. I teach my family and I and our household has important values and philosophies. We're not reliant on anybody. So then the next step is, but I live in a country that has 320 million people, and half of them they can't wipe their own ass without that money for the toilet paper being given to them by the government. And so that creates a situation where my own sovereignty or my daughter's 10 or 20 years from now could be impeded by these other individuals. So then I go, what's the solution, right? I think you're right. It's going to come from local, and almost in some ways, the United States could fragment into some ways into localities. But then I go, ultimately, you still have the federal government saying, hey, you got to follow our rules on the local levels or we'll come after you. Biden said that yesterday about places that didn't want to do what he said to do for 12-year-olds wearing MASKs. I mean, so we're still, that's why I say I almost feel like you get to this point where I'm like, so what's the solution? So do you think that could there be a secession? I mean, what is the solution? Do we eventually just blow each other up and create with nuclear bombs after we have a total slave state and drones are monitoring our every words and people are waiting for the government to give them food for everything and they're in government housing? Or do we secede before then? I mean, I used to think when someone would say secede, the first person I heard saying that was Doug Casey. And when he said that, I was like, this guy's insane. I mean, I'm listening to an insane person. But now I'm like, where we're at, I'm like, I don't know what the likelihood of it. I almost feel like it's too low, but I'm like, what other solution is there other than that to occur? I mean, I guess I'm just kind of.
I think the solution is, again, and it's very unsatisfying, right? Because it's not sort of like this big idea. I do believe that, and we'll see, 2022 may play out with some significant changes because people will be a little bit tired of all of this, and typically the midterms do have consequences. But I really do think the only option, I don't think we're going to have secession. So I think people have to be more engaged, right? And you can't just anymore. Look, if you're a Republican, if you're a conservative, your traditional pastime hasn't been to go out and protest, or hasn't been out to, you're not typically an active, political person. You show up for the big, events, the big elections. And I think what people are starting to realize is on the Democrat side, particularly on the hard left side, they're very organized. They're very good at sticking to a message. And so if you have different political views in that. And if you're frustrated, then as unsatisfying as it sounds, you got to start somewhere. And then unfortunately, that somewhere is right there in your town. And you've got to make a difference. People are complaining about the school boards. Well, you know what? Then you've got to change the school board. To do that, you got to get out and work, right? You got to volunteer and you got to knock on doors. You got to do all those things, right? That make a difference. And then you have an impact there. And then maybe you impact the local town council. And all of those things will have more of an immediate impact on you than the next 3 or 4 presidential elections, right? It just, right now we're in a weird cycle because the Democrats control, both houses and the White House. And that won't last. It never does. And so I think we will see a sea change in 2022. But I don't know why anybody would wait for that, right? If you're not happy with the way things have gone, then get out there and do something. But we're all busy. We're all trying to put food on the table. We're all taking care of kids, and we're all, just trying to live a life. But while you're doing that, right, like Apocalypse Now, Charlie's, squatting in the jungle, right, getting stronger. And that means the other side is, whatever that side is working. They're politically active. I'm not a deep thinker, but I think that one part of it is probably.
You're not a deep thinker after we talk for an hour, just like this super deep conversation.
Yeah. Now my kids don't think I'm a deep thinker. Not after 1 year of homeschooling, they don't. Although they know I'm very successful at day drinking. I'm good at that. So, after homeschooling.
That's number 2 on your list.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's what I'm realizing, and that's kind of what I've been thinking about more and more, is like the local level becomes literally so important. I mean, there's huge organized protests where I live, and I feel like my mom's side of the family still lives in California. I live in southern Utah, not northern Utah, different place. I live in southern Utah. And I went to California to visit my mom recently with my daughter and stuff. And it was literally like another world, truly. And so, whatever is important to us as individuals, I guess, whatever side of the fence you think is important, you're right. I mean, it's easy to get distracted by the bigger levels, but if the right people are in place, no matter what a federal mandate is on anything, whatever it has to do with, if the right people are in place on the local level, for those of us that are going to stay in America, it's almost like that's kind of the most important thing to focus on. Yeah.
This show that we do for Discovery Network, Black Files Declassified, see how I just threw another plug out there. It's the production team, the camera crew and the producers, directors they're all from Canada. So we've been traveling together now for about 3 months, bouncing around the country. And so it's been interesting to look at the country through their eyes, through, a bunch of folks who are, not necessarily, familiar with, the way things are here in the US, and they're great people, right? Fantastic. Not just a great, crew for producing a TV show, but they're just really great people, smart, good sense of humor. And so it's been fascinating to watch as we'll bounce to California, we'll go to San Francisco, and then maybe just to do a segment, we'll fly out to Miami, right? So we're seeing the polar opposites, right, of the country. And then we'll go in the middle of the country, then we'll go up north, and we'll go down south, and we'll go to Seattle or Portland. And they're, they don't miss much, so we'll land in a place like Portland. They'll go, what the hell's going on here? And it only takes them about 5 minutes because they're very keen. Once all the gear gets packed, they're very keen to get out and about and see the town and do a little exploring. And so they're like, what the hell? And then you go, whether it's Texas or Florida or other parts of the country that have realized you can strike a balance, right? You can allow people to have a living and then also encourage those people to do the right thing and to be responsible, but not, with a big boot of government on their neck. And they see that. And so it's been fun to watch and get their perspective on how things have gone.
And I think that's the thing that makes America so unique is that, you know, there's all these micro cultures and micro political philosophies that govern certain areas of America from one extreme to the other. And, you know, before you drove down the street and your car would get exploded with like a potato gun full of an atomic weapon when you're in Portland, before that started happening, it was fun to go to Portland. And like, I loved going, you know, and then on the other side, it's really cool to go to Texas, and like that uniqueness makes America so cool on both sides of the scale. And my concern is the move towards uniformity to one ideology, whatever that ideology is. But I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I really enjoyed our conversation. We've had it.
Likewise. Sorry, I didn't mean to suck all the oxygen out of the room, but yeah, good topics for today, though.
No, it was absolutely great. So let us know. Show actually sounds quite fascinating. It's not rare to find a good show these days. So tell us where we can find that.
Yeah, well, the first season is streaming again on Discovery Plus. So and like I said, the second season that we're filming now, that should start up around the holidays. I'm hoping to have a Christmas episode, special holiday episode, awesome. Christmas sweaters and festive mood, Yuletide stuff. So it's good entertainment, and it's a nice sort of stress reliever from the day job of running Portman Square Group, which is the intelligence and security firm which also in its own mind has, or its own world, has great people. I've been very fortunate over the years. So one thing I did well, I didn't do a lot of things well, but one thing I've done well when I got out of the outfit was I hired really good people, and people that are essentially smarter than I am. And they understand the mission because you explain the mission well, and then you get out of the way and you let these really good, smart, energetic, disciplined people do their jobs, and they do it well. And so I never went to business school, God forbid. But
that's probably why you're successful at business, because you didn't go to business school, right?
Yeah, maybe that's what it was. Anyway, listen, no, this has been really good, and I appreciate it, Jake, very much.
Yeah, Mike, really enjoyed it. We'll link all that down below for everyone listening. Twitter, Portman Square. We'll link the show and everything else. If you don't follow Mike already, make sure you hit the like button on this video if you enjoyed it. Plug it up to your HDMI cable. Grab a glass of wine or a coffee with a friend and enjoy this episode. Give us a comment down below for the good old-fashioned YouTube algorithm. And I want to thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation, Mike.
Thanks, man. Talk to you soon.